Just after midnight on July 22nd, 1990, 13-year-old Deanna Merrifield slipped out of her grandmother's home in Killeen, Texas, and vanished into the night. She had gone to visit her twin sister, but by dawn she was missing. Deanna grew up in a difficult home environment. She and her three sisters endured an unstable household with a mother struggling with alcoholism. Worse, Deanna had been abused by her stepfather, a secret that came to light in 1989 when she testified against him, and he was convicted for these horrific offenses. After this, the sisters were split up among relatives. 13-year-old Deanna went to live with her grandmother. Despite a new home, the significant trauma she suffered at the hands of her stepfather left its mark. On July 21, 1990, Deanna spent a quiet evening at her grandmother's house. After her grandmother fell asleep, Deanna slipped out into the darkness. She headed about 2.5 miles to the Oak Springs trailer park, where her twin sister Rebecca was staying with an uncle. Around 3:30 a.m., Rebecca awoke to a tapping on her bedroom window. It was Deanna. She had arrived in a brown car driven by two young men. The sisters whispered to each other through the window. Deanna showed no sign of distress. It seemed she just wanted to see her twin. Their late-night meeting was cut short when their uncle woke up and told Deanna to go back home. She climbed into the car with the two unknown men and left, and that was the last time anyone saw her. When Deanna's grandmother discovered her missing the next morning, she called the police. It was obvious that Deanna hadn't packed a bag or left a note, and nothing indicated a well-planned departure. Even so, the initial police response treated her as a runaway. Because of this assumption, the case never received an urgent investigation. No large-scale searches were organized, and only minimal press attention was given to the disappearance. Crucial leads went unpursued. For example, the identity of the two men in the car was never determined beyond the fact that they were either white or Hispanic and were quite young. Her sisters would later express frustration that these early decisions lost critical time. With no strong family advocate pushing the police, the case quickly fell through the cracks. In the years after 1990, a few strange clues emerged that strongly suggested that Deanna might have survived. In 1992, Rebecca received a collect call from someone claiming to be Deanna, before the line abruptly went dead. The call was traced to a payphone in Kentucky, leaving the family to wonder if it was truly her trying to reach out or just a cruel prank. Then, in 1995, police in Hurst, Texas pulled over a young woman whose name and birth date were an exact match with Deanna. Unaware of her missing status, the officer let her go. Unfortunately, this incident only came to light years later, and without more details, the lead went nowhere. That said, it may be the strongest piece of evidence to suggest that Deanna indeed survived. The last reported sighting of Deanna happened around 2001. A family member claimed that a young woman resembling Deanna had briefly visited and hinted she wanted to stay hidden. That story couldn't be verified by the cops, but there's also no reason to believe that the relative wasn't telling the truth. In 2007, Deanna's sisters succeeded in persuading the police to reopen the case as a cold case investigation. A detective re-examined the evidence and took steps that had been missed initially. He ensured Deanna's DNA and dental records were in national databases and checked unidentified remains for any possible match. He also interviewed Deanna's old friends, classmates, and neighbors to see if anyone remembered her discussing plans or had heard from her later. Tracking down people decades later was challenging in a community like Killeen, which is largely populated by people associated with Fort Hood, who move frequently. Despite this, he managed to locate many who still remembered Deanna. These efforts confirmed Deanna had been unhappy and craving independence, but uncovered no new significant leads. two main theories have emerged about what happened to Deanna. One is that she ran away and managed to stay hidden. Supporters of this theory note that Deanna was resourceful and streetwise, capable of surviving on her own. In this scenario, the two young men in the car were helping her escape to start a new life. She may have cut off contact and even assumed a new identity. The clues over the years hint she might have lived at least a few years under the radar. Her sisters cling to this hope, imagining Deanna living somewhere under a different name. Naturally, in this scenario, a darker spin on this take also exists. Many have wondered if the two men seen in the brown vehicle had decided to traffic Deanna. Given that these were two men hanging out with a 13-year-old girl at 3 a.m., this seems much more plausible than the view that they may have helped her escape her abusive home life. The other theory is grim, that Deanna met with foul play shortly after she left. At 13, alone before dawn, she was vulnerable. It's possible someone she trusted, perhaps the men in that car, had harmed her that night. If so, the later clues may have been coincidences or mistakes, not genuine signs of her survival. Without concrete evidence that Deanna is alive, her family is painfully aware they must consider this worst-case scenario, even as they hope for the best. To date, however, no physical evidence has surfaced to confirm either outcome. If alive today, Deanna would be in her late 40s. Her family continues to advocate for her, and the authorities believe that given the circumstances, there is a very real possibility that she is still alive. Hey everyone, so just a heads up, there's not as much information on this case as usual, but I had someone reach out to me and ask for me to cover this active, ongoing missing persons case. Think of this as a bit of a public service announcement, and hopefully someone out there watching or listening has some knowledge of the whereabouts of this missing girl. On the evening of April 28, 2025, 15-year-old Jillian Dixon vanished from Owen Sound, Ontario, in Canada. She was last seen around 8 p.m. on that evening. Originally from Flesherton, a small village in southern Ontario, Jillian is described as standing 5 feet 6 inches tall, with medium-length red hair and brown eyes. At the time she went missing, she was wearing loose gray pants, a dark long-sleeved top adorned with light circular designs, and dark socks. She may have been carrying a lavender hardshell Swiss gear suitcase and a leopard print purse or bag. The following morning, Jillian was reported missing. Despite immediate efforts by the Owen Sound cops, including public appeals and detailed descriptions of her appearance, no confirmed sightings have been reported. Investigators have noted that Jillian has known associations in the Greater Toronto area, including Brampton, suggesting she might have traveled or been taken there. Notably, if you have any information regarding her disappearance, I encourage you to reach out to the Owen Sound Police Department. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to hit that like button, subscribe, and also turn on all notifications. In the late summer of 1848, the British warship HMS Daedalus was en route from the Cape of Good Hope toward St. Helena in the South Atlantic. On August 6, 1848, roughly 300 miles off the coast of modern-day Namibia, sailors aboard the Daedalus spotted an astonishing sea serpent gliding through the waves. According to the captain and his officers, the creature held about 4 feet of its head and neck above the water, with an estimated 60 feet or more of its body trailing on the surface. Combining these observations, they approximated the creature's total length at up to 100 feet. The head was described as long, pointed, and flattened on top, with a dark brown coloration and a lighter yellowish-white throat area. Notably, the crew saw no ordinary whale fins or flippers, but instead They reported a peculiar feature along the back, like a shaggy mane or a trail of seaweed atop the body. The animal moved steadily at about 12 to 15 miles per hour, maintaining a straight course even in a choppy sea. It occasionally dipped under waves, but showed no obvious sign of the spouting or surfacing behavior typical of whales. Hundreds of crew members watched the creature in astonishment for a considerable time, with some estimating it remained visible for up to 20 minutes. The captain emphasized how close the creature came, saying that it was near enough that he claimed he could have recognized a person's features at that distance. One lieutenant, Edgar Drummond, sketched the scene and described a long, snake-like form with a dorsal fin about 20 feet behind the head, and perhaps a tail fin further back. Whatever it was, the men of the Daedalus knew they had witnessed something highly unusual. When HMS Daedalus returned to England in the fall of 1848, the captain filed an official report to the Admiralty describing the encounter. Before long, news of the sea serpent leaked to the press, sparking a Victorian-era sensation. The London Times published the report on October 10, 1848, giving readers a vivid account of an enormous serpent seen by Royal Navy officers. The public's imagination was captivated. Here was testimony of a sea monster from a highly credible source. The fact that experienced naval officers, the Daedalus had around 300 men, were willing to stake their reputations on the sighting lent the story instant credibility. Many considered the witnesses, disciplined men familiar with the sea, with some trained in natural science, to be reliable observers, which gave pause even to skeptics. However, not everyone accepted the tale at face value. The scientific community and naval authorities reacted with skepticism and concern. The Times sought a prosaic explanation, and Sir Richard Owen, a renowned biologist, stepped forward to debunk the sighting. Owen asserted that the crew had seen not a serpent, but a large marine mammal, likely an elephant seal, whose appearance misled them. He argued that the reported long tail was nothing more than a trail of disturbed water following the creature as it swam. The captain vehemently rejected Owen's explanation. He fired back in the press, insisting that neither he nor his officers could mistake an elephant seal or any known creature for what they saw. To them, the suggestion was absurd, given how close and clear their view had been, and the public debate grew heated. Some sided with the captain, convinced that the ocean harbored at least one species of gigantic unknown animal, while others agreed with Owen's interpretation. Unsurprisingly, the Admiralty wasn't amused by the spectacle and all the attention generated by the incident. The affair even reached Parliament, where officials questioned the judgment of naval officers who promoted apparent monster sightings in the media. An inquiry was held into how the captain's report got published, and the Navy felt some embarrassment at the situation. In spite of this official disapproval, the captain stood by his story. He even cooperated with the Illustrated London News to publish engraved illustrations of the creature based on the crew's testimony. The dramatic images, printed in late October 1848, grabbed public attention even further and were reprinted across the world. These illustrations, essentially the Victorian equivalent of viral photographs, cemented the Daedalus sea serpent as one of the era's most famous maritime mysteries. The HMS Daedalus incident has continued to fascinate researchers, skeptics, and maritime historians to this day. With the benefit of hindsight, many have tried to pin down what exactly the crew saw. Over the years, several explanations have been put forward. A prevailing view is that the Daedalus crew encountered a known creature under unusual conditions. Owen's own theory that it was a large seal was one early example of this approach. However, the seal hypothesis itself is now largely dismissed as not fitting with the significant eyewitness evidence. In modern times, the leading explanation is a type of whale. In 2015, for instance, biologist Gary Galbraith argued that a rare whale, called a sei whale, best fits the description. A sei whale feeding near the surface can present a long, dark back with a pointed head and pale underside, much like the creature described. The reported dorsal fin position, roughly 20 feet behind the head, also matches a sei whale's anatomy. Notably, the initial sketches of the creature depict it in a much less serpentine way, while subsequent sketches were sensationalized substantially. Some suggest that the crew might have been fooled by an optical illusion or a combination of mundane things appearing as one. Rough seas, reflections, or floating debris can sometimes trick observers. Others have suggested that it may have been a group of whales or dolphins that the observers incorrectly viewed as a single entity. However, given the length of the sighting and the number of witnesses, a purely illusionary scenario seems unlikely in this case. The mid-19th century did see a few hoaxes related to sea monsters, and some modern observers have tried to fit this incident into that narrative. However, nothing about the Daedalus case suggests a hoax by its crew. The officers had no clear motive to lie, and in fact they risked and received significant ridicule and professional backlash by coming forward. While newspapers may have exaggerated certain details for effect, the core testimony appears sincere. Personally, I see no reason whatsoever for the crew to lie about this encounter, and the idea that the entire ship could be brought on board for a weird sea serpent hoax seems highly unlikely. Another possibility considered is that the Daedalus encounter was with an unknown or subsequently extinct species. Fans of this theory have hailed this incident as one of the best pieces of evidence for an uncatalogued sea monster. Speculations have included a surviving plesiosaur, an immense marine snake or eel, or even an undiscovered giant squid. To date, however, no tangible evidence has ever emerged to support the existence of such creatures. Others believe it may be a creature that went extinct in the subsequent years, but no evidence exists for this being the case. More than 175 years later, the Daedalus sea serpent encounter remains a fascinating unsolved mystery. In hindsight, the most plausible conclusion is that the crew did see a real animal, but misinterpreted its appearance. However, with no physical proof and only the crew's reports, there's significant room for speculation. What is certain is that this is one of the best documented sea serpent sightings ever, and it made a lasting impact on both popular imagination and scientific debate. Claudia Lawrence was a 35-year-old chef from York, England, who vanished in 2009. Born on February 27, 1974 in the town of Malton, she grew up in North Yorkshire and later settled in the Heworth area of York. She worked as a cook at the University of York and was considered reliable and hard-working. Claudia lived alone in a home in Heworth and was close to her family. Her father, Peter, was a lawyer, and her mother, Joan, had been a local mayor. She was sociable and independent, often spending evenings at a local pub with friends. Claudia had never married and had no children, but she maintained what has euphemistically been called a quote-unquote active social life. She had a series of romantic relationships, including some with men who were married or involved with others. She was discreet about these liaisons, a fact that would later draw significant media attention after she disappeared. On March 18, 2009, Claudia followed her usual routine. She worked an early shift and was captured on CCTV heading home around 3 p.m. That evening, she spoke with both of her parents by phone and sounded cheerful and normal. She even made plans for the upcoming Mother's Day with her mom, and she said she was going to bed early because of her next day's early shift. Also, just a quick programming note, Mother's Day in the UK falls on the fourth Sunday of Lent, rather than in May. Her car was in the garage for repairs, so she would be walking to work. Claudia sent her last known text at 8:23 p.m. and received a reply at 9:12 p.m. After that, no one heard from her again, but there's significant evidence that she would attempt to get to work the following morning, but I'll come back to that. When Claudia didn't show up for her 6 a.m. shift on March 19th, her colleagues became alarmed. She wasn't the type to miss work without warning. Later that day, she also failed to meet a friend at their local pub as planned, and calls to her phone went unanswered. By the next day, her family's concern had turned to panic after her friends raised the alarm. That afternoon, her father went to her house to check on her, accompanied by a family friend with a spare key. Inside, everything was in place and there were no signs of a struggle. The bed was neatly made and a few dishes were in the sink, suggesting she had eaten before heading out. Crucially, her handbag, containing her wallet, bank cards, and passport, was left behind. However, her cell phone was missing, as was the blue and gray backpack that held her chef's uniform. It appeared she had left for work as usual early on March 19th, but never arrived. Peter Lawrence contacted North Yorkshire Police to report his daughter missing, and a full investigation began. Initially, the police saw no immediate evidence of foul play and treated Claudia's disappearance as a routine missing person case. They considered the possibility that she might have left on her own, but her friends and family insisted she would never vanish without telling anyone. As days passed with no sign of her, the voluntary disappearance idea became less likely. Officers searched along her walking route for any clues of an accident or abduction and found nothing. In the first weeks, hundreds of police personnel and volunteers scoured the area, making door-to-door inquiries and combing the area extensively, but no trace of Claudia turned up. There was also no activity on her bank accounts after she went missing. By late April 2009, about 5 weeks after she vanished, the case was reclassified as a suspected slaying inquiry, reflecting the growing fear that Claudia had been harmed by someone. Detectives explored various scenarios in the early stages. They looked into whether a stranger might have attacked Claudia during her pre-dawn walk, but no evidence supported the theory of a random assailant. Some tips about suspicious people in the area led nowhere, and checks on known offenders in the region revealed no connection. With those leads exhausted, investigators turned their focus to people in Claudia's life. The case drew nationwide attention almost immediately. Given her ties to Cyprus, and that the last text she received was from a friend there, officers traveled there to interview friends she had met on holiday. However, they found no evidence that Claudia had left the country or that anyone overseas was involved. Back in York, detectives interviewed dozens of people who knew Claudia and dug into the details of her personal life. They learned she had been involved in multiple relationships, some of which weren't publicly known to her friends and family. Police theorized that someone close to her, perhaps a lover, ex-partner, or the angry partner of someone she knew, might have had a personal motive to harm her. They compiled a timeline of her recent social contacts and activities. Some individuals were hesitant to fully cooperate, possibly out of fear or a desire to keep certain matters private. In 2013, new forensic techniques were applied to the case, and these developments led to a series of arrests in 2014 and 2015. In May 2014, a 59-year-old local man was arrested on suspicion of Claudia's slaying. He was a former work colleague who lived near Claudia's home and had occasionally given her a lift. Police searched his properties but ultimately found no evidence to charge him, and he was released. Over the next year, several other men in their 50s were arrested, including a pub landlord and a few of the men who socialized with Claudia. Some were held on suspicion of the slaying, and others for allegedly hiding information. Each arrest led to extensive searches and interviews. However, as with the first suspect, nothing definitive could be pinned on any of them. By 2017, a total of 9 people had been arrested over the course of the inquiry, yet no one was charged, and Claudia was still missing. The theory most favored by police is that Claudia was slain by someone she knew. The narrow window of time during her routine walk and the lack of any signs of struggle or robbery suggest she likely encountered a familiar person. Most victims know their perpetrator, which also supports this line of thinking. Under this scenario, the perp may have approached her in a non-threatening way, perhaps offering a ride or engaging in conversation. This could explain why no one reported witnessing anything unusual on the morning in question. After all, people are seen getting in and out of vehicles all the time, and the only way that sort of event would stick out is if there was something truly bizarre or unusual about the interaction. Others speculate that she was slain by someone she had an affair with, or by the spouse of one of these individuals. In the former case, it's been speculated that the individual may have viewed Claudia as a liability and eliminated her. In the latter case, some have alternatively speculated that the slaying may have been a professional job, and that Claudia may have been brought to a site where she was finished off. Another possibility is that Claudia fell victim to an unknown attacker in a random crime. Investigators considered the scenario of a stranger abduction, but they found little evidence for it. Speculation about known serial offenders was explored due to some coincidental similarities, but no connection was ever established. Likewise, the idea that Claudia chose to disappear on her own has been firmly rejected by both police and her family. She left behind all her important belongings and had made plans for the near future. It's now been more than 15 years since Claudia vanished, and if she's alive, she'd be in her early 50s. That said, investigators firmly believe that she isn't alive, and that she was likely slain on the day she vanished. For now, the disappearance of Claudia Lawrence continues to remain one of Britain's most haunting unsolved mysteries. For anyone who has lived with a dog or even walked past a neighbor's yard, barking is a familiar soundtrack of domestic life. Yet, step into a forest where wolves roam, and you'll hear something very different. Wolves howl and whine and growl, but they very rarely bark. This contrast raises a fascinating question. When and why did barking become such a hallmark of the domestic dog? To answer that, we need to journey back into history and examine how barking evolved during domestication. Barking, as we know it in dogs, is largely a product of domestication. Thousands of years ago, the ancestors of today's dogs were wolves that began associating with human groups. Over generations, those wolves transformed into dogs, adapting to a new way of life alongside humans. In the wild, adult wolves seldom bark. In fact, barks make up only a tiny fraction of wolf vocalizations, and are typically heard only in specific situations like warnings or defense. By contrast, domestic dogs woof it up frequently and in a wide range of contexts. This dramatic increase in barking didn't happen by accident. Scientists believe it's deeply tied to the process of domestication and the unique evolutionary pressures of living with people. One key factor is neoteny, the retention of juvenile traits into adulthood. Domesticated dogs exhibit many puppy-like behaviors that their wolf relatives outgrow. They remain more playful, more submissive, and they whine and bark far more often than adult wolves do. Wolf pups naturally yelp or bark in distress or during play, but as they mature, they switch to the more subdued communication of adulthood. Domestic dogs, on the other hand, never fully give up those puppy habits. Early humans favored dogs that were gentle and friendly, and in selecting for those traits, our ancestors may have unwittingly prolonged dogs' juvenile tendencies. The result was a creature that behaved in some ways like a wolf pup that never grew up, including a greater propensity to bark. Interestingly, experiments in domestication support the idea that sociability can bring about what I'm going to term barkiness. In a famous Russian study, scientists bred foxes for tameness over many generations. The result was foxes that not only wagged their tails and acted puppy-like, but also started to bark and whine in adulthood, sounds their wild counterparts seldom make. Selecting for a friendly, human-oriented disposition seemed to unintentionally produce animals that vocalize more, much like dogs. All of this evidence points to an evolutionary story. As wolves became dogs, living in the human world reshaped their voices. Barking evolved from an infrequent juvenile noise into a central feature of canine communication. If barking evolved under human influence, what exactly are dogs saying with all those woofs? For a long time, barking was dismissed by some as meaningless, just an excited noise without content. However, modern research paints a different picture, and barks have turned out to be surprisingly rich with information. Notably, though, this primarily seems to be information designed to be communicated to humans rather than other dogs. Dogs use different kinds of barks in different situations, and these variations can convey distinct messages about what the dog is feeling or trying to accomplish. One way to understand bark communication is to consider context. A dog barking frantically at a stranger through the fence is having a very different conversation than a dog barking repeatedly while playing fetch. A scientific study examining thousands of dog barks across various contexts revealed clear distinctions. Alarm barks triggered by disturbances are low-pitched, harsh, repetitive, and rapid, serving as serious defensive signals. Isolation barks, indicating anxiety or loneliness, are higher-pitched, tonal, and drawn out, resembling cries for companionship. Playful barks, heard during friendly interactions, combine varied pitches, excitement, and short bursts mixed with playful growls. Interestingly, playful barking varies greatly from dog to dog, suggesting individual styles during relaxed moments, while alarm barks remain consistent, like a universal warning system. What's truly remarkable is that humans can pick up on these differences in bark meaning even without training. In experiments, people were able to listen to recordings of barks and reliably tell whether the dog was playful, fearful, or aggressive, solely from the sound. Dogs have evolved barks that effectively convey their inner states and needs, and humans, whether consciously or not, have become adept at understanding those vocal cues. It's important to note that while barking communicates information, it's not exactly a language in the human sense. Dogs don't have a dictionary of bark meanings that they consciously select from, but through instinct and learning, they produce woof sounds that fit what they're feeling.